Chapter 74. Take a Dip. Summary. The group takes another pit stop, this time on an ocean planet. What will they find under the waves? For once, Katsuki wasn't going to protest an unnecessary stop. And by all practical logic, it was unnecessary. But the looks of unbridled excitement on the two kids' faces as they approached this ocean planet never let even a whisper of protest form in his mind. The massive planet was 90% water, though it was hard to see from space with the thick cloud cover. But once they broke through the thin haze, they saw the sprawling, sparkling diamond waves. Pyrepa and Fastel letting out excited trills all the while. Sure, the two had gotten to swim a little on that forest planet, but Katsuki knew it wasn't the same. He knew this wouldn't be the same as they truly craved, but it would have to do. So many things were just similar enough to Earth to make him crave that dumpster fire of a mud ball. Like how the glowing moss had looked like the fireflies he and Deku would catch when they were younger. He'd ignored the squeezing of his heart when he realized what they were. He had to stay strong. All the teens did, but these two were kids. He could make an exception to his want to get his family home as soon as possible, to give them this. They were kind of like his family too, like annoying little cousins he'd been put in charge of watching at a family barbecue. He may want to curse out the ones responsible for leaving them to him, but he wouldn't take it out on the kids. He'd never do that to family. Katsuki was careful to hold on to something as they landed on the sandy beach. When the ship suddenly tilted as it settled, he was left standing while Mina had fallen on the ground. He just smirked and headed to wait by the doors. They were all just in the spacesuit portion of their costumes, as it was the only waterproof part. They sure as hell were not going into an alien ocean with whatever they could pass off as swimwear. Plus, this would essentially be a wet run for the suits, to see if they could withstand the vacuum of space. Katsuki wasn't worried. The gremlin was insane, but she was good at what she did, so he was confident that it would work. Well, that or explode. One of the two. Besides it being an effective test for the suit's ability to keep air in and everything else out, it would also be a test for their ability to move around in simulated zero-G. The suits, because of course they did, contained stores of pressurized air that they could release to propel themselves. They should also practice while under Ochako's quirk, but this would be a decent way for them to grasp the basics without her overexerting herself. The door slid open to reveal a white sand beach that morphed into crystal clear waves. There was no need for his helmet above water, as the air was safe to breathe, so Katsuki hopped out of the ship and onto the shifting sand. Thanks to the suit, his body was at a comfortable temperature, but the sun beat down on his uncovered face. "Hurry up so we can get in the damn water," Katsuki called back to the others, already feeling sweat beading on his brow. He barely finished his sentence when a wave of sand washed over him. Pyrepa pulled himself from where he'd face-planted and bolted over towards the water, but before he could make it, Katsuki grabbed his shoulder. "Slow down. You don't go in without the rest of us," Katsuki ordered. Pyrepa looked disappointed, but stopped his dash to the shoreline. Katsuki set his gaze on the water, inspecting how, despite the sand, the shore seemed to drop off rather quickly. Only a few steps into the water, he would be completely submerged. A little further off, he could see plants swaying in the water, and little colorful fish flitting about. They quadruple-checked that nothing on this planet was particularly dangerous, but Katsuki still scanned the area. The sentients that lived on this planet didn't have any recorded settlements in this region, so they should be fine. Still, he'd brought along his brass knuckles, given, despite the fact his suit could retract to expose his hands, the water wouldn't really let him use his quirk. He'd advised the others to bring something, but they'd ignored him. He looked over the water one more time, just in case. His attention was at last redirected as the others landed on the beach with a soft, grainy thud. "This is going to be so fun!" Mina squealed, walking forward with a bounce in her step, despite how it caused her to stumble in the sand. "I've always wanted to go scuba diving." "Do you think we'll see a shark?" Denki asked, head tilting to look at the water. "I doubt they have any sharks here," Deku said. "But I'm definitely excited to see what sea life on a different planet looks like. I just wish my journals were waterproof." He sighed at that last bit, patting where his thigh bags would normally sit. "You never know what's out there," Denki said. "Some of the things on Terra look like they came from other planets." The electric blonde shivers a bit, taking a step back. "Like, have you seen the stuff that lives in the deep? Pure nightmare fuel." "Calm down, Sparky," Katsuki huffed. "We're not going to get deep enough for anything like that." Which Katsuki was thankful for. Not that he was scared, but seriously, some of those deep-sea fuckers can go straight back to the hell they crawled out of. No thank you. "Well," Ochako announced, "time to head in, right?" Mina and Denki hopped in place, ready to make a break for it. "Okay, but remember this is kind of a test for the suits and helmets," Deku interjected. "We have to take it slow." "Sure, whatever you say," Denki half-heartedly agreed. Then, with a mischievous smile, he shouted, "Last one in is a rotten egg!" before sprinting right towards the water. Katsuki wasn't worried about the suits notwithstanding, so, with a quick click to the collapsible helmet base that was around his neck, he dashed off after the boy. If he was going to make an exception for this stop, he was going to at least try and unwind a little. He didn't like how he got when he was too wound up. So he'd let go. Not completely, though. He had to stay on guard. The sand shifted under his feet as he pushed off into the air, hanging in midair for a split second before breaking the surface. Water rushed past him, sending bubbles in front of his helmet to obscure his vision. Katsuki had expected some level of cold from the water, but there was just a slight pressure, keeping the suit snug against his body. Muffled splashes sounded from beside him as the others plunged into the sea, further sending bubbles through the water. He could make out a black and red blob, a pink and turquoise blob, a red and gray blob, a yellow and white blob, and a turquoise and maroon blob. That just meant the siblings were still on the beach, but that made sense. He doubted they understood what being a rotten egg meant. Katsuki turned back to the open water, squinting as the last bubbles dissipated. A small gasp echoed in his helmet. In front of him, behind tinted cyan waves, lay a mesmerizing expanse. The surface view had not done justice. Painted with vibrant colors of all hues were coral-like structures, housing fish that shimmered like diamonds. Plants of the most saturated green swayed as if dancing, while others resembling crystals branched out like trees. Glowing disc-shaped plants released wavering bubbles every few seconds that floated to the stained glass surface. All of this life thickened into an underwater forest that traveled as far as the eye could see. His gaze was torn from the thriving landscape to the two new figures that entered the water. Purple and yellow rocketed past, the water waving him aside in their wake. They moved as if in an intricate dance, weaving in and out of the plants. Previously hidden fins adorned their bodies, the ones on their tail especially having extended. With each twist and turn, the appendages naturally bent to assist the change in direction. A bright giggle echoed through the water as the purple blur, Pyerpa, approached them. "Come on," he chirped. There was a new quality to his voice, the water making it flow with a more lyrical lilt. "Let's explore." "Remember to stay close," Katsuki chided. Pyerpa nodded before, with one powerful flick of his tail, he sped off towards his sibling. "Anyone drowning?" Mei suddenly asked, a slight rumbling of her suit's jets vibrating through the water as the pressurized air successfully moved her. Though he wasn't sure if she actually meant to starfish spiral, but being Mei, he couldn't be sure. There were a chorus of nopes, which he just grunted along with. Despite not being able to see Mei's face, as she was still somersaulting through the water, he could hear the manic grin as she spoke. Great! Now, everyone shake themselves so the fins can extend. I'm sorry, the what? But as he looked closer at Mei, who was at last coming to a halt, he saw semi-transparent membranes had somehow come to adorn the arms of her suit and the backs of her legs. It looked pretty similar to the siblings' own fins, and considering they had helped make the suits, they had to be the inspiration. Not complaining, but Mei, girl, why did the suits have fins? Also, how did I not know about this? Mina demanded, hands tracing the fins of her own costume. You didn't know? Mei questioned, seeming genuinely confused. Huh, sorry about that. Well, while the pressurized jets of air help with propulsion, these should definitely help with steering. Not so much in the vacuum of space, but on low-gravity planets or underwater? Definitely. The dreadlocked-haired girl, also, how did all of that hair fit in her helmet? Floated in place, a finger coming to tap the bottom of her helmet. Did I also forget to mention the BCD? Huh? You know, buoyancy control device, so we can move through the water without floating to the surface. Yeah, that did not clear things up, but Katsuki didn't really care. This just proved that the gremlin knew her shit. Enough tech babble. Let's just get a fucking move on. Katsuki tisked, eyeing how the siblings flitted about in anticipation. All right! Ochaku cheered, pumping her fist in the water. This is gonna be so cool! He saw the jets on Ochako's suit activate, and instead of going forward, she began to spin. Mei? Ochako asked. How exactly are we supposed to work these? The sound of cackling was not reassuring. It had taken them the better part of an hour, but they were finally able to move around without crashing into each other or the ground. Some were doing better than others, and Mina, she was not on the better side. It was actually Katsuki who seemed to get maneuvering with jets first, mostly relying on the ones on his wrists. He said he got it first because he was the best, but Mina thought he had an unfair advantage thanks to his experience flying with explosions. Ochako was also pretty good, more thanks to her knowledge of how to move in zero-G than anything else. Izuku was okay, citing his knowledge of physics and minor practice with float as the reasons. Denki was just as bad as her, so Mina found some comfort there. Mei built the thing, so of course she kinda knew how to work them. And wasn't Mina just a little annoyed that Mei had added things to the suits without telling her? This was her idea in the first place, so even though Mina's sure Mei didn't mean anything by it, she was still a little ticked. Back on Earth, Mina hadn't taken charge of things the way she really should have. She'd just been drifting by, doing what everyone else was doing. She hadn't considered how important things like body armor were. She hadn't even thought about taking the initiative to learn a weapon. In a lot of things, she'd just been scraping by. Mainly when it came to studying. It'd never been her strong suit. But she really wanted to start applying herself, and she thought that these costumes were just the way to do that. So it just felt bad that she'd been left out of one of the more technical editions. Even if Mina hadn't directly worked on the intricate tech, she'd still listened to Mei ramble as she made it, trying to absorb what she could. Despite her feelings, Mina tried not to let them ruin the fun trip they were on. She'd never considered going scuba diving back on Earth, but if it was anything like this, she got the hype. It was absolutely amazing. Her eyes were glued to the colorful landscape, and even more so to the alien fish things that drifted by. None of them seemed particularly fast, just flapping along. They sort of looked like different types of sea slugs, all vibrant colors and weird jelly shapes. Everywhere they went, it was mesmerizing. Despite their shaky control, the group was able to explore the underwater planet for hours. Until they ran into an issue. They were traveling through some odd arch-like rock formations, the midday sun casting shadows on the greenery-filled sea floor, when an arrow-looking projectile cut through the water, leaving a trail of bubbles in its wake. Mina had been so focused on their little adventure that she didn't even react until Katsuki had hit the thing off course and into one of the rocks. "Group up!" Katsuki shouted, backing up. "The kid's in the middle!" Mina searched for where the arrow had come from as she hurriedly moved towards the others. The arches were pretty far above them, providing cover to whoever was out there, while the long seaweed-like columns of plant life obscured behind them. Her eyes were drawn to every sway of the plant's leaves, but none revealed the culprit. The water was still and quiet, as before, as they floated in a weird defensive circle. She didn't really know how things were supposed to work like this. Normally they just had to worry about threats coming from the sides or above, but in the open water, there were 360 degrees to worry about. When the next arrow came, Mina locked onto it right away. She didn't know how it was able to travel so fast through the water, but it shot forward like the last one. This time, it was kicked out of the way by Izuku, one for all crackling along his body, and embedded in a stone arch. Mina hadn't brought her scythe. She hadn't thought she'd need it, so it didn't seem worth it to detangle the belt holster, despite Katsuki's protests. This was supposed to be a relaxing swim. What was happening? Mina retracted the suit material from her hands and gathered a glob of acid, but almost immediately it dissipated into the water. Shit! This was not good. No one had brought their weapons, and only really Izuku's quirk worked underwater. Another arrow whizzed by, then another and another. Mina did her best to deflect one, but when another came at her, she was forced to dodge away from the group and behind a column with Pyropa. Moving through the water with her suit was difficult. She'd barely managed to get out of the way in time. Most of her fighting strategy relied on movement. He looked at her with wide, fearful eyes. "What do we do?" Mina didn't know the answer.